The United States just tried, and failed, to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile, or ICBM, and the Russians are laughing at them. Now, before you get too worried about what launching an ICBM could mean, just know that this launch was a test. But it was a pretty big one, with the missile in question being an LGM-30G Minuteman III, one of the missiles that the US might have to rely upon if it ever needs to launch nukes overseas. The Kremlin hasn't made an official comment on the failure either, though they are aware of it. To find the mockery, you need to look at the passive-aggressive remarks made and broadcasted on the Russian media. For example, Alexei Leonkov, a Russian military expert, told RIA Nostovi, the state-owned Russian newspaper, that the test proved the Americans were launching old missiles that were well past their sell-by date. The Russians would take that as a good sign. It's a definite propaganda victory in the wake of so much examination into Moscow's use of outdated tech in its war against Ukraine. But the question is simple: is the mockery justified? The Russians may have found a sliver of propaganda to hold on to, but a deeper look into what this failed launch means for the US is needed to see if the Americans are really using antiquated equipment or if this was just an honest blunder. That examination starts with the missile itself. The LGM-30G Minuteman III, or just Minuteman III for short, is the latest iteration of the Minuteman weapon system, which was set up in the late 1950s. The first missile to come from that system was the Minuteman I, which was actively deployed throughout the 60s. The development of the Minuteman I was a significant leap forward in missile technology. By incorporating inertial guidance and quick-reacting systems, along with new components, the Americans had on their hands a missile that would go further and survive more obstacles than any of its predecessors. The evolution of the Minuteman took place throughout the 60s, with the first successful test launch of the Minuteman III occurring in August 1968. It went into active deployment in 1970, and it's been part of the United States' nuclear deterrent triad ever since. And why wouldn't it be? The missiles are still capable of traveling for about 6,000 miles at speeds of up to 15,000 miles per hour, making them hard to intercept in time before they reach their target. But the design is old, over 50 years old at this point, which is where the tests come in. The United States regularly conducts tests on its Minuteman III arsenal, which is believed to be somewhere between 400 and 500 strong, to ensure its reliability. The most recent test, which occurred in early November, was, quote, safely terminated around midnight after Air Force Global Strike Command, AFGSC, detected an anomaly during the test. We don't yet know what that anomaly was. Even the AFGSC is still in the dark, claiming it needs time to analyze the launch. The military publication The War Zone echoes that sentiment, saying that there are no clear indications of what caused the failure, noting that it is concerning to those in charge. An X, or formerly Twitter user, named M51.forever had more details. The account, which regularly posts about strategic missile systems, published a photo of the launch and told followers that the failure occurred at some point after the first stage of the missile's launch, resulting in an uncontrolled descent into the Pacific Ocean. The account also pointed out that this failure was the first in 17 launches, with the previous 16 going off without a hitch. But that didn't matter to the Russians, who were quick to jump on it as evidence of the United States' supposedly aging missile situation. Beyond Leonkov's comments from earlier, the Ardenia Burevestnik Telegram account, which covers Russia's own Burevestnik cruise missile project, rubbed salt in the wounds. It called the failure unusual and pointed out that it shows how the US desperately needs to modernize its nuclear triad. Another Telegram post, this time by an account called The Russian Engineer, said the failure was serious news that could call into question the entire Minuteman solo missile. The mockery got worse. In the state-run Sputnik newspaper, a columnist named Mikhail Shankman got a double shot in. As well as mocking the age of the missile, he had also made sure to point out that it is significantly younger than Joe Biden. That crafty 1-2 punch is the best example of Russia's attitude to the launch failure. Haha, your missiles are old and outdated, which means they're no threat to us. But is that really the truth? And if it is, does Russia's own stockpile of missiles present more of a threat to the United States than America's missiles present to Russia? To answer those questions, we need to dig deeper into the capabilities of each country in the missile department. We'll start by building on a point mentioned earlier. There were 16 successful Minuteman III launches between 2018 and 2023, with this latest failure being the first since a similar failure 5 years ago. That's not necessarily bad news for the US's aging Minuteman stockpile. Remember that the stockpile includes between 400 and 500 missiles. If we go down the conservative route and assume the US has 400 Minuteman III missiles ready to go, we can apply the 16-to-1 ratio to that stockpile. In other words, for every 17 Minuteman III missiles the US launches, only one is going to fail. That leaves us with about 23.5 dud missiles. Not bad, seeing as it would mean that the US still has a touch over 375 working Minuteman III ICBMs that are all ready to go. That is more than enough to annihilate Russia or any other country that gets into America's bad books. Additionally, the Minuteman III isn't going to be America's premier nuclear-capable cruise missile for much longer. The country is currently working on the Sentinel ICBM, the intended replacement for the 400 Minuteman missiles the US currently possesses, but this upgrade is probably not coming until late 2029 or early 2030 as the project is plagued by rising costs and delays. That means the Minuteman III is likely going to stick around for at least the rest of the decade, maybe even longer, depending on how the Sentinel project progresses. Still, the Minuteman III is just one part of the state's nuclear triad. It's three legs on which the country's entire nuclear arsenal stands. Beyond the Minuteman III ICBMs, which the US can launch from land, the country also has the ability to launch from the air or sea. The air is where it's most dangerous. Should the states ever need to launch nukes from the skies, it would rely on either the B-52H Stratofortress or the B-2A Spirit. The B-52H is a monster of a plane. It's a heavy bomber that can fly over long distances, using precise targeting systems to accurately drop nukes or conventional weapons at will. But taking a closer look at the plane reveals that it's about as old as the Minuteman III missiles. The first B-52H model had its maiden flight in 1952, with the bomber entering military service in 1961. As Mikhail Shankman pointed out, that's still not as old as Biden. Even so, it's not like the US is using a state-of-the-art bomber to conduct its nuclear runs. Having said that, the B-52H has undergone many upgrades, both to its fuel capacity and its precision guidance systems, meaning it's not as cutting-edge as it may appear. In fact, the Air Force thinks that these massive planes will remain in commission until sometime in the 2040s. The B-2A Spirit is a little younger, with its first flight taking place in 1989. Unlike the B-52H, it's a stealth bomber that's capable of flying under the radar until it reaches its destination, at which point it drops a payload with the aid of precision guidance systems. However, it's also showing its age, and the Air Force acknowledges that fact as it's already in the process of replacing the B-2A with the B-21 Raider, an upcoming stealth bomber that can accommodate manned and unmanned operations. So that fleet will look very different come the end of the 2020s. Both planes are scary, but both are pretty old too. And even with the B-21 on the way, Russia could easily continue its mockery of America's aging nuclear triad. Still, if Russia feels comfortable with the age of America's equipment for land and air-based nuclear strikes, it may feel a little less comfortable with its sea-based options. Or maybe not. America's sea-launching capabilities rely on the 14 Ohio-class ballistic missile subs, SSBNs, that it has in its arsenal. Those submarines were built somewhere between 1974 and 1997 and are capable of launching the Trident III D5 missile, which has an internal guidance system capable of traveling about 4,000 nautical miles with multiple payloads attached. Threatening for sure, but the newest of these submarines is now 26 years old, making that fleet more potential fodder for the Russian propaganda machine. As with its planes, the US recognizes that the Ohio-class submarine needs an upgrade. That's why it's commissioned the Columbia-class SSBNs as a replacement, but they're not going to be operational until sometime in the 2030s, leaving the US with submarines that have a design dating back to the 1970s. Yeah, there's no getting around it, this is an aging arsenal. But America is well aware of that fact. It's actively working to replace the Minuteman III, its B-2A stealth bombers, and its current stock of submarines. Still, you could make a case for Russia's mockery being valid. Only one of those new pieces of tech is going to be available in this decade. Not the most reassuring news if America was to head to a nuclear war situation in the 2020s. And Russia has even more reason to laugh now that its own Sarmat nuclear missile system is approved for active combat duty. The RS-28 Sarmat, eerily dubbed Satan II by some media outlets, is a new ICBM that Putin says should make any other country think twice about positioning itself as an enemy to Russia. According to Yuri Borisov, who leads Russia's Roscosmos space agency, the missiles assumed combat duty in September 2023. What little information we have about this new missile makes for a scary reading. According to Russia's state-owned TASS media agency, the Sarmat missile is capable of carrying a nuclear payload of up to 10 tons, literally anywhere in the world. It's even capable of flying over both the North and South poles, with no negative effects caused by the magnetic interference that occurs over those locations. Further reports published by Al Jazeera suggest the missile can travel up to 11,000 miles, almost twice the range of the Minuteman III, lending credence to Russia's claim that it can launch against any country in the world. Add to that a shortened launch phase, making launch difficult to detect, and you have a scarily advanced nuclear delivery system. Still, the states dispute some of Russia's claims about the Sarmat. For instance, Russia claims the Sarmat can carry up to 15 nuclear warheads at once. The US disagrees, with its estimate being about 10. Neither is especially encouraging. And with Sarmat now operational, it's clear that Russia thinks it has a leg up on its long-standing rival in the ICBM department. But maybe the US has the advantage when launching from the sea. That might not be the case either. In November 2023, Russia announced that it had completed a successful launch of an ICBM from one of its Bory-class submarines. The launch was notable both because it happened right around the time of the state's Minuteman III failure and due to it coming days after Putin withdrew Russia from the Global Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. He told the world that this withdrawal came so that Russia could bring its testing in line with the US, and it appears this launch was intended to send a clear message. While your missiles are falling out of the sky, we're completing successful launches from the sea. Russia can even claim that its SSBN arsenal is better than the states. Though smaller, Russia has 11 SSBNs to America's 14. The fleet consists of Bory A-class submarines. These subs entered development in 1996, just a year before the completion of the state's newest SSBN, and entered operational service in June 2020. So Russia has newer missiles and newer subs, and isn't shy about testing either anymore. But what about planes? That's the one area where Russia appears to fall behind the US. Putin seems to rely more on adapting existing aircraft to deliver nuclear warheads rather than developing aircraft that are specifically designed to deploy them. Take Moscow's plans to place nuclear warheads in Belarus, for example. In June 2023, Putin announced that he was moving 10 nukes to Belarus, which just so happens to border Ukraine. That move would be accompanied by work on 10 Belarusian Sukhoi 25 or Su-25 jets, with the goal being to make those jets capable of delivering a nuclear payload. The Su-25 is an interesting case. First deployed in 1981, the aircraft is one of the few in Russia's air fleet that's capable of conducting close-to-ground operations. It has an approximate flight range of 621 miles, meaning that if Russia is going to use it to deliver nukes, it can only do so to countries in close proximity to where the jets are stationed. Hence the move to Belarus. That brings this fleet of 10 jets and the 10 nukes Putin sent to Belarus closer to Ukraine, a clear threat. Nevertheless, the Su-25 is a far less effective nuke delivery system than either of America's current options. And when the B-21 Raider is launched, the already old Su-25 will seem positively ancient. So score one for the US. But even that win means the US is losing this little game of tactical nuclear weapon deployment 2-1. Russia has more modern cruise missiles, it has newer submarines which are just as ready to launch their payloads as American subs are ready to launch their Trident missiles, and even though the states can claim air superiority over Russia, that won't mean much if Moscow's claims of the Sarmat's 11,000-mile range are true. Russia wouldn't need to launch from the air. They could just fire a Sarmat missile from within their borders and hit any target on the planet. All of this feeds into the mockery that the US has endured since the failure of its Minuteman III test. But while Russian media has been quick to throw shade at the states, Putin has been pretty quiet. As we mentioned at the start of the video, there's been no official word from the Kremlin about the test. The mockery isn't coming from those who are high up in Moscow, but that doesn't mean that Putin isn't joining in privately. In fact, some of his more recent moves suggest that he has renewed confidence that if Russia and the states were to ever engage in nuclear war, then Russia would win out. We see that in the state-sponsored announcement of the Sarmat and Russia's new nuclear submarine capabilities. Yes, those are displays of strength, well-timed ones at that, but there's a veiled message behind all the bluster and military posturing. Our nuclear launch systems are better than yours. While that is disputable, at least if you believe the Russian propaganda, there is no denying that those systems are newer. The fact that Russia is so willing to show them off is a subtle jab at the United States that tells us Moscow truly believes it has the upper hand in the nuclear race. But there are other signs of increasing Russian confidence. Take Moscow's rhetoric about using nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Yes, that talk has been going on since 2022, but it's accompanied by similar threats to the NATO states that are supporting Ukraine, at least according to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Though most commentators suggest that these threats are a bluff, an attempt by Russia to have the rest of the world back down and accept its annexation of Ukraine, Putin's more recent actions might suggest otherwise. The delivery of nukes and the modification of planes to launch them from Belarus suggests that the West needs to take these threats more seriously. And let's face it, Russia wouldn't be making those threats in the first place if it wasn't both confident in its own missile systems and less concerned about the threat posed by the states than it had been in the past. Of course, the threats could all be propaganda, a puffing out of the chest that's designed to scare the West, particularly America, into submission, so that Russia can get what it wants based on warnings and threats rather than further military engagement. And it's telling that Russia also hasn't followed through on those threats despite making them for over a year at this point. They could be mind games, they could be an attempt at blackmail that plays on the West's fear of a wider war erupting as a result of the Ukraine conflict, but still Russia is moving nukes closer to Ukraine. Combine that with the previously mentioned de-ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, as well as its withdrawal from the New START nuclear treaty, and we're seeing an increasingly cocky Russia. For all of Putin's talk that these moves are designed to simply bring Russia into parity with the US, the reality may be much different. Perhaps Putin isn't looking for parity. He may believe that Russia can pose more of a threat than the US, thanks to its new ICBM and SSBN tech, with withdrawal from the treaties paving the way for him to make further threats. Perhaps the clearest representation of Russia's perspective on the US's nuclear capabilities doesn't come from Russia itself. Instead, it comes from an October 2023 report published by the House Armed Services Committee. That report put into words the opinion that likely pervades Russia when it says that the increasing nuclear threat from Russia and China is an existential challenge for which the US is ill-prepared unless its leaders make decisions now. For 145 pages, the report makes that point over and over again. The US isn't ready, Russia is, and that probably mirrors Putin's thinking, as well as being evidence that the scaremongering of his recent nuclear threats is working. This isn't to say that Russia doesn't take the threat that the US poses seriously. It knows that the US has about 3,700 nuclear warheads. It knows that even with the Minuteman III launch failure, the States has plenty of nuclear delivery options available to it. But perhaps now Moscow believes that it could strike the first blow, taking out the US before it's ready to respond, thanks to the Sarmat ICBM. It's a scary prospect, and it raises an obvious question. What is the United States doing about Russia's increasing threat? That's where the modernization programs we touched on earlier come into play. The US is replacing its stealth bombers to make it easier to deploy nukes from the air. It's also in the process of replacing its SSBNs and ICBMs, although neither will be ready before the end of the decade. But even when those modern solutions are in commission, it looks like the States will still be playing catch-up to the Russians. Why? Let's come back to the Sentinel ICBMs that are intended to replace the Minuteman III stockpile. Those missiles haven't even undergone their first test flight yet. And when they do, the prevailing opinion is that the missiles will have a range exceeding 5,500 kilometers or about 3,500 miles. Assuming 3,500 miles is the actual range, you'll know that it's 2,500 miles shorter than what the Minuteman III can achieve. While Russia supposedly has access to ICBMs that could hit any country on the planet, America's newest ICBMs can't even go as far as their old ones. They'll be more reliable, sure, but if Russia's claims about the Sarmat are true, it can travel a little over 3 times farther than the upcoming Sentinel. Now consider this. The current stockpile of Minuteman III missiles is located at Warren Air Force Base in Wyoming. The distance between Wyoming and Moscow is about 5,400 miles. Russia's Sarmat can travel that distance with room to spare. But if the predictions about the Sentinel's range are true, it'll drop out of the sky 2,000 miles before reaching Moscow if it's launched from Wyoming. America would have to move its ICBM somewhere closer to Russia for it to even have the ability to reach Moscow. As for Russia, they can launch their Sarmat from practically anywhere and still hit the States. The irony in all of this is that the Minuteman III might actually be a better option for the US if nuclear war does break out. So let's come back to America's failed test. Why was it even happening in the first place? Officially, the reason for the test was simple: to make sure the missile works as it's supposed to. Clearly, it didn't. But there is speculation as to why. As we already know, the AFGSC has said little more than it detected an anomaly during the launch, claiming to need more time to figure out what that anomaly was. But the X account M51.Forever, which earlier told us about the uncontrolled descent of the missile, has some theories. It says that the failure may have occurred because the US was, quote, trying something new, such as loading the Minuteman III with equipment that'll go on the upcoming Sentinel, or giving it a non-standard trajectory. The latter reason in theory is especially interesting because the US is far from the only country that's testing ICBMs. Others are too, with several of those countries being potential threats to the states. Of course, Russia is the most obvious, as it has the new Sarmat system and it can now launch ballistic missiles from submarines. Furthermore, April 2023 saw it conduct a test launch of an advanced ICBM, likely the Sarmat, hitting a target in Kazakhstan, meaning the missile traveled a distance of about 1,750 miles. But Russia is far from the only country with ICBMs. In November 2022, North Korea achieved its second successful launch of an ICBM. South Korean and Japanese officials speculate this missile is the most powerful the country has, with the test seeming to be a clear threat to Japan. After all, the ICBM landed in the waters west of Hokkaido, Japan's northernmost island, and the states took the test so seriously that all American personnel stationed on the Misawa Air Base were ordered to seek cover as a precaution. All told, the missile traveled 620 miles to hit its target, though it actually went further as it reached an altitude of 3,700 miles. The message from North Korea was clear: we can hit Japan with our ICBMs. So North Korea is establishing itself as more of a threat. Same goes for China. We know that China has access to ICBMs, and the country is very eager to show off its potential nuclear power. Its advancements in nuclear modernization have gone so far that Defense News reports that China has now more ICBM launchers than the United States. Yet more worrying news for Washington. Iran is establishing itself as a player in the nuclear arms race too. For as much as some try to downplay that country's nuclear threat, Reuters reported that Iran claimed to have achieved the successful launch of its own ICBM back in May 2023. That missile, named the Karam Shar, apparently has a range of 1,250 miles. Russia, China, North Korea, Iran. 4 countries with anti-West sentiments, and 4 countries that either claim to have an ICBM capability or actively proven their claims. Oh, and don't forget about India either. Though far less aggressive in its anti-West sentiments, India prefers to keep good relationships with as many countries as possible. You can't forget that India is a part of the BRICS economic group that includes Russia, China, and Iran. India has ICBMs too, with Al Jazeera reporting on the successful test launch of its Agni 5 missile, which can travel for up to 3,300 miles back in December 2022. Perhaps now it's clear why the states are conducting Minuteman III tests in the first place. The country is rapidly losing its position as being one of a select few that has access to ICBMs, and it's watching as other countries that aren't supportive of its geopolitical positions are slowly building stockpiles of ICBMs. It has to respond with test launches simply to showcase its own nuclear readiness as a deterrent to any anti-West countries that might start getting ideas of the nuclear war variety. And if you don't believe us when we say that that's the reason these Minuteman III tests take place, believe U.S. Strategic Command. In September 2023, they published a piece about how a test launch of a Minuteman III ICBM on September 6th showcased its safest and most effective nuclear deterrent. Presumably, the most recent launch was supposed to achieve the same goal, but it failed, leaving the U.S. looking weak on the world stage. Russia's taken advantage of that fact with its mockery. By now, you might be getting a clearer picture of why it's so brazen with its propaganda. After all, though Putin hasn't said anything directly about the failed test, the publications that have run the mocking quotes we've highlighted in this video are either Moscow-owned or state-approved. Putin doesn't have to say anything. His country's media is doing it for him. And it's doing it against a backdrop of apparent Russian supremacy in the ICBM race. Assuming all the claims it's made about the Sarmat are true, which we encourage you to note is a rather large assumption. What's more, Russian confidence is further boosted by so many of its allies having ICBM capabilities too. International Politik Quarterly says that Russia is a key partner for China as both countries search for a way to create a new geopolitical landscape in which the West no longer controls things. That's a lot easier to do when both China and Russia have ICBM capabilities, with Russia's mockery serving to weaken the US in the eyes of other countries, even if the occasional failed launch is just par for the course. Iran is also a strategic ally of Russia, with the Russians being the chief supplier of weaponry to Iran. it's not outside the realm of possibility that a little bit of Russian know-how has gone into the development of Iran's ICBMs. As for North Korea, speculation about its militaristic relationship with Russia has run rampant since the Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu visited Pyongyang in July 2023. While there, Shoigu attended a parade that showcased North Korean missiles that supposedly have the range to reach the American mainland. Mockery is one thing. Both Russia and the US engage in subtle jabs, especially when a notable military failure occurs. They've been doing it since the Cold War, constantly undermining each other. But now Russia's able to mock from what appears to be a heightened position thanks to its more modern nuclear options. And even if the Sarmat isn't all it's cracked up to be, Russia still has alliances with China, Iran, and North Korea, all countries with ICBMs of their own to fall back on. The US is modernizing. We can see that from the many plans for new ICBMs, submarines, and planes that we've discussed in the video. The question is, will that modernization come in time? Or does Russia's mockery today translate into a serious nuclear problem tomorrow? Now check out, could alliance of China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran destroy NATO? Or watch this video instead.